Hey you guys, it's Alexis, aka The Soft Reader, and I'm here today to do another Top 5 Wednesday video. Top 5 Wednesday is hosted by Thoughts on Tomes, and I will leave her channel as well as the Goodreads group where we post all the topics and links and such down below. This week's topic is books that are not set in or inspired by the Western world. So this is basically books that don't take place in North America or Europe. Every book I'm mentioning obviously takes place outside of those. A lot of these are literary fiction, one is magical realism, one is a fantasy. This is definitely one I would love to hear you guys' answers for. I would love to get recommendations for non-Western stories. These are all ones that I've read in school except for one. But they're all stories that I loved and that I definitely want to recommend and to get more people to check out. So yeah, so we'll just go ahead and get right on into it. The first one I'm going to mention is a play. It's my favorite play, and it's one I try to recommend to everyone I can, and that is Master Harold and the Boys by Ethel Fugard. This takes place in South Africa during the apartheid period. Fugard himself is a South African playwright. And this basically follows our main character Harold, who is white, and it's about the relationship that he has with his family, but also with these two men, one man in particular, who are black, who basically work at the cafe his mother owns. And it's a lot about the relationship and their social differences and apartheid as a greater construct. It's a really short little play, but it packs a powerful punch, and it's just so, the story is just so beautiful, especially as you're watching our main character grow up and learn a lot about the world and his place in it and his family, and it's a really beautiful little play. If you really enjoy plays and you've never read this one, or if you're interested in reading a play about South Africa and apartheid, I highly recommend this one because I just think it's such a special story. The next one I'm going to mention is The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. I've talked a lot about how much I love this book on my channel, and this story does take place in Chile, which is of course in South America. So this story follows 3 generations of women in this family, and it's magical realism, so it's a lot about their everyday life as Chile is going through a huge cultural change and how it inevitably leads to a political revolution. And it's about these 3 women and their struggles with family, their relationships to their mothers, and love. And this book, man, the last chapter in this book is just so amazing because in the true spirit of Latin American magical realism, it binds the entire story together, and it's cyclical, and it's so good. Not enough people have read this story in all of its glory and experienced it for how magical it is, and how talented Isabel Allende is. I just think that this book is so magical, and it has a lot of history about Chile in the first half of the 20th century, and it's very autobiographical for Isabel Allende, and it's just so good. It's such a great story. The next one I'm going to mention is The Wrath and the Dawn by Renee Ahdieh. This is of course a reimagining of 1001 Nights, as it follows our main character Scheherazade, as she basically volunteers to be the wife of a king who has been recently marrying a new woman every day and killing her once morning comes. And it's about Shazi wanting to get revenge for her friend who has died at the hands of this king, and it's about her discovering what's actually going on the whole time. This story actually takes place in Khorasan, which when I googled it said that Khorasan is the historical name for what is now Afghanistan, parts of Iran, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, I want to say, and I could be wrong, but basically all of those countries once was known as Greater Khorasan, which is where this story takes place. So it's definitely non-Western in that sense, and this is actually one of the few YA stories that I think takes place in this region that's a fantasy based. So that alone I think makes it a very special story, but I also just think this is a really good story. I think Renee Ahdieh is a really talented writer. I think she is really descriptive without being overbearing, and she just draws you into the story, and there's something really magical, especially about this first book in the series. And so I definitely highly recommend it for people who want to read a YA fantasy based in that portion of the world, because unfortunately it's one of a very small selection to choose from. The next one I'm going to mention is Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. And Chinua Achebe is a Nigerian author, and this story is about Nigeria pre- and post-colonialism in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And this basically follows this one family as they're dealing with colonialism and the introduction of Europeans in their small village in Nigeria. And it's a lot about these Nigerian tribes and the relationships they have with each other and the politics that goes on in their individual villages. This is a really, really good glimpse into a small piece of Nigerian history. It was a piece of history that Achebe himself focused a lot on in his writing, and it's definitely a perspective that you can only get from a non-Western book because it is about this European colonialism. And so that is something that makes this book really special, but also just the fact that this book is about so much more than just the colonialism, because it's about this family and this tribe and their relationship with each other and their relationship with other tribes. And it's really, 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 really good, and it has a lot to say about pretty much all of those things. And just in general, I think Chinua Achebe is a really talented author. And he's written a lot of great stuff, so in general I recommend him, like I recommend all of these other authors, but Things Fall Apart was the first book by him I read, and so that's the one I'm going to recommend to you. The next story I'm going to mention is one I know I have mentioned on my channel before, and that is Balzac and the Little Chinese Seamstress by Dai Sijie. And this takes place during Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution in China in the 20th century, and the author Dai Sijie actually left China mid Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution, and he went to live in Canada, I think. Anyway, so this is also a lot about his experiences and the experiences of his family members during this time period. This individual story actually follows two young boys as they're sent to a re-educational camp in the mountains of China. Their parents are viewed as rebels, and so they're sent away to try and cure them of their rebellion and make them loyal to China. And this story is a lot about China as a whole during this time period. These characters are very much meant to be a metaphor for China. But yeah, I mean, I feel like this is a really small book, but it's really important in a lot of the things it has to say. And I feel like not a lot of people have read this. And I was so lucky to be able to read this in school and talk about it in a scholarly setting. And I'm disappointed that I feel like so many people have missed out on that, because I think this is a really interesting story. And I think a lot of the content in it is just really eye-opening. Alright guys, so that was this week's Top 5 Wednesday. I would love to hear you guys' suggestions for books not set in the Western world and or not inspired by the Western world, especially fantasy sci-fi stories. If you guys have fantasy sci-fi stories to recommend me, I would love, 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 love to hear them. So excited to hear those. So please leave those suggestions down below, and I'll see you guys soon with another video. Bye!